There you go. Okay, I hope you had a nice break for lunch. Took a few minutes off. This is a finance heavy day. And this last one is two presentations combined. And so they're a little bit different, but they're important. We're going to start off talking about taxes. We're going to do the same thing. Instead of having Amy helping me today, I have, let's make sure we mute if you can.
Trying to find, hold on.
I moved quick. Okay. Instead of having Amy Kim, I now have Wendy Harville, who is our incoming compliance support officer. Could not be more thrilled to have Wendy. If you see Wendy's shirt, I'm jealous. I want one. I'm going to get one. It says, I love compliance. I love compliant units. I'm going to change that to say, I love compliant units. So we're going to talk about taxes. Taxes seem, I was a CPA, and taxes can be intimidating to me, right? I was an auditor, not a tax person, but we're going to talk high level about everything you need to know about taxes for PTA. Okay. It never lets me do that. Okay. So overview, we're going to show you guys some resources, talk about the tax filing requirements and due dates, what to file and with whom, what to do after you filed, which we all know is very important in PTA, and then just some of the supports that we have and tools. If you need to file extension, how to do that. And if you are out of compliance, how to get back in compliance. Sometimes that's the most important one, right? Just like in Treasurer, which most of you were in, we're talking about our financial resources. The toolkit is always fantastic, as is CAPTA's website. For the tax resources, taxinfo@capta.org is our tax filing support specialist. Her name is Donna Broussard. She is very kind, very good at answering quickly, and very good at explaining exactly what people need to do. So if you cannot get a hold of one of us, which you should be able to, it's also okay to just reach straight out to CAPTA. They'll either, let's see, they'll either refer you back to us or help you out directly, but either way, we're going to get you an answer. Let's move on, because we talked about that earlier. The importance of tax filing compliance. You must be compliant with your taxes to retain your tax exempt status as a 501c3 nonprofit organization. To avoid delinquency, suspension, and/or revocation by the IRS, Franchise Tax Board, Attorney General's Registry of Charitable Trusts, and the Secretary of State. Those are the 4 governing agencies that we deal with a lot. Some of you, if you're incorporated, will deal with the Secretary of State. If you are not incorporated, you will not need to do anything with the Secretary of State. The easiest way to figure out if you're incorporated is to look at your bylaws and look at your name. If your name has comma, INC period at the end, you are incorporated. If it does not, you are not incorporated. If you are incorporated, you have one more very, very simple biannual filing. You want to avoid paying late fees and penalties. You want to make sure that you continue the continuity of the PTA and their ability to conduct their business for your schools and as a 501c3. And then also to remain eligible for a letter of determination and charitable donations. Often when you ask for charitable donations, they will ask for your letter of determination. Your letter of determination, I believe we'll talk about that later on, but that's essentially what you give to a donor that says, yes, I am a nonprofit. Your donation is tax deductible, and here is my federal employer ID number that tells that they use on their taxes. We're going to run this the same way, guys, where I will be talking, and if you have any questions, throw them in the chat. We'll stop for questions, and Wendy can help post some questions. So Tax filing requirements. All nonprofits, including PTAs, are required to file annual tax filings. Your federal one is with the Internal Revenue Service, just like your personal filings, but we file a Form 990, a 990EZ, or a 990N based on your gross receipts. Same for the California Franchise Tax Board. You will file a Form 199 or a 199N based on your gross receipts. And then after those two are filed with the Attorney General Registry of Charitable Trusts, we will file an RRF1, and that is an annual filing. Now below that is the Form CTTR1, which is new this year, yay for all of us. That is only required if you file a 990N. If you file a 990 or a 990EZ, you will simply include copies of those accepted filed filings, informational filings, and file those and send that in with your RRF1. If you file your gross receipts are less than 50,000, you will need to also include a little bit more financial information, which we will give them in the Form CTTR1. Guys, I touched on it a little bit before in the treasurer's class, but I will speak to it again. Failure to file will equal fines and could equal loss of tax exempt status. I just this past year been working with 4 units to abate fines with the IRS. That has not been a fun process this year because the IRS is working on about a year lag of processing their documents. And they don't work through things very quickly anyways. So one of our units has just under a $7,000 fine. One has a $600 and one has about a $3,000 fine that we're trying to abate. Please don't put us in that position. Don't put your units in that position. If we just file on time, that doesn't happen. And this is what I spoke to before. Incorporated PTAs must file a statement of information every 2 years. That is the Secretary of State SOS Form SI 100, which can be filed online now, which is amazing. Another way to know whether you're incorporated, if your FTB entity status number begins with an 8 or a 9, the PTA is not incorporated. If it starts with a 0 through a 4, you are incorporated. Where can you find all of these identification numbers? Your franchise tax board number, your corporate number, your CT number, your fine. Those are all in your bylaws. They're also in myPTEZ. Every single unit has access to the free component of myPTEZ called document management. And when you log in there, all of your numbers will be listed across the top. So what are these numbers? The EIN is your employer identification number that is issued by the IRS. Your FTB entity number is issued by the Franchise Tax Board. Your CT number is your charitable trust number issued by the Attorney General Registry of Charitable Trusts. If your CT number includes the letter CT at the beginning, you must include those letters as part of your number. They are part of your number, okay? Some older CTs, like if you were started like in the 1950s, some of them don't have those. Some of them it's just a number. First District does not have it. Starts with a 01. It confused me. Now, I understand why. Okay, filing due dates. So tax filings are due 4 months and 15 days after your fiscal year ends. So for almost all PTAs, we are either a May 31st, and so you must file your taxes by October 15th, or we're a June 30th, and so we must file our taxes by November 15th. Okay, let's talk about our Form 990. So our Internal Revenue Service, the IRS Form 990, we file it annually. If your PTA normally, we'll talk about normally in a minute, if your PTA normally has gross receipts of 50,000 or less, you can file a 990N electronically. If your PTA normally has gross receipts of more than 50,000, you need to file a Form 990EZ or a Form 990. So gross receipts, we talked a lot about this in treasurers. Gross receipts is the total amount of income the organization received from all sources during its annual tax year without subtracting any costs or expenses. So it's your total income. But remember what that one qualification was. Gross receipts do not include funds not belonging to the unit. So gross receipts do not include those per capita membership dues that go to council, first district, state, and national. So let's talk about normally. You will see that a lot. An organization's gross receipts are considered normally to be 50,000 or less if the organization is up to a year old and has received or donors have pledged to give 75,000 or less. That's only if you're in your first year. If you're not in your first year, ignore what I just said. Between years 1 and 3 years old, an average 60,000 or less. Again, if you're not between 1 and 3 years old, ignore that. The next one is the one that matters. An organization's gross receipts are considered normally to be 50,000 or less if the organization has averaged 50,000 or less in gross receipts for the immediately preceding 3 tax years. That includes the year that it would be filed. So for 2021 filings, I would look at 2021, 1920, and 1819. And I'm going to average all of those. And if the average of all 3 years is less than 50,000, then I can file a Form 990N. A Form 990N takes 2 minutes to file. Maybe a little bit more. It will not take more than 10 minutes of your time. Okay. Always keep a copy of signed tax forms for unit records and note the date that they were submitted. I will add to that. For me, the most important thing is not when they were submitted. We urge you to file electronically, because when you file electronically, we get an acceptance almost within the next 24 hours from the IRS. When you don't file electronically, we don't know if they received it. Now you can send it certified mail return receipt, but even then it goes into their paper stacks. And that over the last year we've seen has just kind of gone into this black hole, to be honest with you. So if at all possible, file your returns electronically and keep a copy. In fact, upload to myPTEZ a copy of the acceptance. That is your proof to the IRS that you did file your filing and they accepted it. Okay. Okay. If you are filing a 990/990 EZ, I will tell you that we do recommend you use a nonprofit tax professional. Please do not go to, I'm not allowed to say their names, but the ones that have the guys on the corner with their signs. They are not nonprofit tax professionals. They do not understand nonprofit tax filings. They are very good at doing your personal taxes. They do not know how to file nonprofit tax filings. If you need to know, if you need a recommendation, you can contact your counsel, because I guarantee you somebody else in your counsel uses a nonprofit tax professional, or you can always call First District and see if we can refer you to somebody. So if you are filing your 990 or your 990 EZ, that means your gross receipts were 50,000 or over, a Schedule A is required. So make sure when you review your taxes and you get them back from that tax professional, they have included a Schedule A, right? Let's see. This is the reason for being a public charity. That is what the Schedule A. We are a membership organization where more than 33 1/3% comes from dues and donations. That's what your tax preparer will check. Please make sure, I'm going to say that again. The reason for being a public charity is that we are a membership organization where more than 33 1/3 comes from dues and donations. Many tax preparers get this classification wrong, which means your Schedule A isn't filled out correctly. And if a schedule is not filled out correctly, it means it hasn't been filed. With the IRS, if your filing hasn't been filed, it can be up to $20 a day penalty. So that adds up really, really quickly. So even if you do have a tax preparer, make sure you're looking at, go back to this, what is this called? Presentation. This is my third one today, guys. I'm getting tired. Wendy, will you do me a favor and will you drop in the chat a link to where these live, the presentations and handouts?
Of course.
Thank you. Okay, also a Schedule B is required if you receive 5,000 or more from a single donor. If you receive 5,000 or more from a single donor, go PTA. But that might be a grant that you received, right? So make sure that you're paying attention to that as well. Come back to these slides if you need to when you're reviewing, and even use these slides to present to your executive board as you do review your tax filings. Okay, help for tax preparers. They always get this one wrong as well. Our group exemption number is our GEN is 0646. That is the group exemption number for California State PTA, which is where we all derive our tax exempt status with the IRS. Okay, once again, we have it written out here. PTA is an organization that normally receives more than 33 1/3% of its support from contributions, membership fees, and gross receipts, and no more than 33 1/3 of its support from gross investment income and unrelated business taxable income. So there it's written out for you. If you need to file an extension, and sometimes we do need to file an extension by November 15th or October 15th, if you're a May 31st year end, we just weren't ready. And that happens sometimes because we're volunteers. Maybe you make sure that you file this by the due date. It is a form 8868. Know that approved extensions cover both the 990 and 990 EZ filing, the 199 and the RRF1. Highlighted there, and probably most important, is you cannot extend your due date if you have failed to file for 2 consecutive years. If you have failed to file for 2 consecutive years and you're late this year, you very well could lose your IRS tax exempt status. That's 3 years without filing. Okay, before we move on to the Franchise Tax Board, Wendy, do we have any questions?
We do have a question. The first question is, are there any pros or cons to being incorporated?
Good job, guys.
Good question. We prefer any new units, we do not incorporate. The laws have changed where initially, because of some of the laws in California, we wanted units to be incorporated for protections for their directors and officers. Because those laws have changed, we are actually working to unincorporate our units that are incorporated, though that is slow going. And all new units are not incorporated. But great question.
We also have, just wanted to get clarification that the average of the gross receipts from the last 3 years, including the current year, is what you need to determine which 990 to file.
Correct. Correct. Well said.
And then we also have somebody who believes that the auditor is responsible for filing taxes. And I thought maybe you could comment on that.
The auditor is not responsible for filing taxes. The auditor did not do the books, right? The auditor is not the owner, the one responsible for the books. The person responsible for the books is the treasurer. The auditor simply reviews them for correctness and completeness. The responsibility of filing taxes is on the outgoing treasurer. And obviously, if the outgoing treasurer doesn't do it, the incoming treasurer is going to need to ensure that it's done to make sure that we maintain that 501c3 tax exempt status.
So Judy, if you have any further questions, obviously, please reach out to us if you need any clarification on if you're being asked to file those taxes. Another question has come up as to whether or not non-cash donations count towards your gross receipts.
They do, absolutely. Non-cash donations has always counted towards your gross receipts. This is something that PTAs haven't paid as much attention to until the last year, when the Office of the Attorney General Registry of Charitable Trusts decided to add non-cash donations as a line on their RRF1 form, and also include it on the CTTR1 form, which is why as PTAs we're starting to get a lot of questions on non-cash donations. Non-cash donations, from an accounting perspective, should have always been included and accounted for as revenue. This is probably not the time or the place because it could take a long time, but if you have questions about non-cash revenue, I have something that I've put together that I can email to you that will explain how to account for those and what we would need to account for. Great question.
And then I just had two things I thought maybe we could clarify. You know, we talk about the loss of your your tax exempt status, but like, what does that mean to a unit or to, you know, okay, so then what, I guess.
Right. Right. And I do believe that we'll talk about it a little bit later, but that's important and we need to hit on it multiple times. If you have lost your tax exempt status, you can no longer operate as a nonprofit, which means you should not be receiving donations. You should not be receiving memberships. So if you have lost your tax exempt status, you need to get on the phone with us at First District as soon as possible. We would have already reached out to you multiple times before you got to that place. But if you have lost your tax exempt status, you can no longer operate as a nonprofit. You cannot, and you need to put a pause on operations as a PTA.
Thank you for clarifying.
Yep.
And then one last thing to clarify, what happens if you have a tax professional who is filing electronically on your behalf? Would you recommend that they get confirmation from their accountant that it was filed?
Absolutely. Anytime anybody else files for you, one of the deliverables to you at the end should be a page that shows the line item that says accepted by the IRS or the FTB. If you have not received that from your tax professional, I just had one 2 weeks ago where we looked into it and they had to go back. They were like, wait, I used a tax professional and they filed it for me, and they went back and the tax professional sent them a screenshot that said it was rejected. So they thought they'd done everything, they paid, but it got rejected electronically. And so then once it's rejected, you have one more chance to file electronically. And if it's rejected again, then you have to file via paper. So if you get to that point, please reach out to us and we can help you. We can even have a conversation with the tax professional to make sure that they know what they're doing, because we want to make sure you retain that tax exempt status so you can do your business of your association and advocate for the kids. Okay, anything else before we move on?
One last question is,
Yep.
if a unit chooses to close down, can they reapply or reactivate in the future?
If a unit chooses to close down, they would not be able to reactivate under the same tax IDs. So it would be a new, because if they shut down, you have to file final taxes, which is telling the IRS, the FTB, the OAG, and the SOS that we are no longer a business. And so if you do want to come back as a PTA, we can certainly recharter you as a PTA, and it would just start up as a new business and you would get all new identification numbers. But we don't want to lose you. Talk to us before that happens, please.
Exactly. All right, I believe that is all of our questions for right now.
Okay, great. Okay, so let's talk about the Franchise Tax Board, California. Again, we're going to file annually. This is going to be very similar. If your PTA normally has gross receipts of $50,000 or less, you can file a 199 electronically. I will say that one thing they haven't included on this is that when you file, if you file a 990N, you don't actually even have to include your gross receipt number. All you have to do is say, check a box that says, I did make 50,000 or less. With the 199, you will need your gross receipt number. That gross receipt number is the same number that you're going to use on your OAG, RRF1, and CTTR1. So we're going to need to make sure that that's a very correct number. Okay. So when you go to log on, to file the 199, you're going to want to make sure you've got your gross receipts number as well as your identification numbers. If your PTA normally has gross receipts of more than 50,000, you'll need to file the form 199. If you contract with a tax professional, they know that they need to file all three of these filings. So that should be in the contract that they will file your 990 or 990EZ, your 199, and your RRF1. Okay. Okay, so let's move on to the Attorney General's Registry of Charitable Trusts. That is a very long name, so a lot of times I just say the OAG. So if I say OAG going forward, that's because I've been talking for 4 hours and my voice is getting tired. Okay, again, you are going to file annually. This one requires a fee. The fee is right here. Can you see this? So if your gross annual revenue is less than 25,000, you have 0 fee. If it's between 25 and 100, you have 25, and so on and so on. So make sure you send that fee in with your filing. If you do not, then it will not be accepted. They're gonna send you a letter and say, oh, you guys need to send this back. But they're quite nice, to be honest with you, and they're quite responsive. And so, you know, you need to pay it, but it's not the end of the world. They're not going to remove your tax exempt status for that. You can mail it in, or you can use the online renewal system now. That's new within the last year or so. I haven't actually personally used it, but I have heard people use it, and it does seem to be fairly simple. So again, you can always do a paper option, or you can use the online renewal system. Let's see, a couple things on the RRF1 that are critical. The RRF1 is going to have a series of 9 questions, right? One of the questions is, was an audit performed in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles? And a lot of times people think that because there was an audit performed, that's a yes. That is a no. Yes, we do a type of audit, but our PTA audits are not audits in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. It's more of a financial review, so it should be a no to that. If you did a raffle, it's going to ask you if you ran a raffle that year. You're going to want to check yes and include your raffle report. Any one of the questions, those are usually the only two that's usually the only one we answer yes to, the raffle. If you answer yes to any of the other questions, you do need to provide a statement as to why you filed yes. If you do think you need to say yes on some of those, please reach out to us just to confirm, and we can help give you confirmation on whether you should mark yes or no on that. Okay. So the Attorney General Registry of Charitable Trusts new form CTTR1, before this last year, they were fine knowing that units that made $50,000 or less, they didn't want any detail. But for some reason in this last year, they have now asked for a significant amount of detail on that $50,000 gross receipts, almost as if you were filing a 990EZ or a 199. So a lot of us are kind of shaking our heads, but it's something that you have to do. Make sure you do it. If you file an N, a 990N or a 199N, you must include the CTTR1 form with your RRF1. If you filed a 990, 990EZ or a 199, 990 or 990EZ, you simply include a copy of the 990 or the 990EZ with your RRF1. So if you don't have one of those, you need to fill out this CTTR1. On CAPTA's website, there are annotated versions of both the RRF1 and the CTTR1 to help you fill those out. I personally have helped tons and tons of units fill out the CTTR1. If you are an accountant, it makes perfect sense. If you are not an accountant, it doesn't make perfect sense. And so if you need help, please reach out to your council treasurers, or you can always reach out to me, treasurer@pta1.org, for the next 3 weeks. And then Amy can take over and help out. So any questions on the main 3 filings?
We don't have, the one question we do have is whether or not the RRF1 should be filled out by the accountant or by us.
If you are using a tax professional, they will do your 990, your 199, and your RRF1. That should be the package because they know that those are the 3 required filings for every single nonprofit. If they don't, ask them for a discount.
Exactly.
Okay, let's talk about Raffles. How many of you guys have done Raffles? No? Yeah, okay. So let's talk about, we talked a little bit about it in Treasure, but I'm going to give you the definitions. An opportunity drawing, which is what we do all the time in PTA. You show up to our meeting and you get your name put in a hat and you might get a cup or you might get M&Ms. An opportunity drawing is a prize where everyone who attends the event has an equal chance of winning. And here's the key, no one pays for a ticket, okay? A raffle is a type of lottery in which prizes are awarded to people who pay for a chance to win. A raffle is governed by the California Attorney General, okay? If you want to do a raffle, First District PTA does a raffle every single year at our holiday luncheon. It's super fun. We love doing it. No big deal. By September 1st of each year, you need to file a raffle report. You can find that on the OAG's website. It is the raffle name is CT-NRP1. I'll say that again, CT-NRP-1. That is essentially you're submitting for a raffle permit. And that requires a $20 fee. You need to have your CT number, which remember where we can get those? Bylaws, myPTEZ. You need to have current status with the Attorney General. So you need to have made sure that all of your RRF1s have been filed and accepted. Sometimes a current entity status letter from the FTB is also required. They didn't ask me for that last year, but you very well might need that. That is very easy. You just click on that link right there. It's going to take you to the FTB's website, and you print off a letter that says, yes, I'm tax exempt, and you include that. Now, if you have a raffle, you need to turn in a raffle report. That is the CT-NRP2 report by October 1st of the following year. If you get a raffle permit and you do not hold a raffle, you still have to turn in a raffle report, and that is due on October 1st, okay? So no matter what, if you apply for a raffle permit and you get that permit, you have to turn in that report. Okay, any questions? So a couple other things on raffles. Raffles may include, but are not limited to, raffles, donation drawings, Ducky Derby, and cow chip bingo. I don't know what those are. Maybe you all do. 50-50 raffles and online raffles are illegal in the state of California. I'm going to say that one more time because we've all been to our kids' soccer or baseball or whatever games where they did 50-50 raffles. 50-50 raffles are illegal in the state of California. online raffles are illegal in the state of California. Okay, any questions on raffles? Because I would say we get a lot of questions on raffles.
I don't see a question here yet, but I just thought I would throw this out there because I see this happens quite a bit. What happens if when you ask everybody to pay their membership fees, they automatically get entered into a drawing to win some cool, school swag?
Yep. Fantastic question. I have heard that answered different ways, but I actually sat in the legal and tax advice training with our California State PTA attorney and a member of one of the high people up in the office of the Attorney General's office, and they both said that that is not considered a raffle. They are paying for their membership. They are not paying to be entered into the drawing. So that is not considered a raffle, but thank you for asking that. And this year in that class at CAPTA was probably the very first time where I have gotten very clear clarification on that.
We also have a question as to if everyone who donated money during a fundraising drive is entered into a drawing to win Disney tickets, is that considered an online raffle?
Again, that would fall, they asked about online as well, and it does not. However, if it was advertised that your donation would enter you into a raffle, I personally believe that is really tricky and you should probably have a raffle permit for that. If it is advertised that your donation enters you into a raffle for something as big as Disney tickets, go ahead and get a raffle permit. It doesn't hurt.
All right, and we also have a question as to whether or not the online raffle includes an online auction.
The online raffle includes an online auction.
Is an online auction considered an online raffle? Like if you have a silent bid auction.
No, that's not an opportunity. That's not, I don't believe so. No, that's not a lottery, right? That's the highest bidder wins versus the lottery. The lottery is what they're trying to regulate.
Right. And I think we just wanted to get clarification on the, if you're asking, for the fundraiser to win the Disney tickets, just making sure that it's not considered online gambling.
Based on the answer from our attorney and from the Office of the Attorney General, I do not believe so. But that's another one where you could always call the Office of the Attorney General and pose it to them and see what they say. Because we are not experts on the legal side of raffles.
And then the last question, just more of like membership drive opportunities. If we had a membership drive, members are entered into an opportunity drive to win a barbecue basket. Is that considered a raffle?
No, that falls back into they are paying for their membership. That is, the assumption is that they are paying for their membership. That is, again, straight from the attorney and the representative from the Office of the Attorney General.
All right, and then the last clarification on the Disney winnings. If we advertise that anyone who donates as part of the fundraiser is entered into an online raffle, is this okay to do?
It's still a raffle.
So you still need to get a raffle permit.
Yes, the online part, honestly, I'm not an attorney, so I would recommend you calling the Office of the Attorney General and asking them that.
All right. That is all I see for right now.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so the Secretary of State, and again, this is only for those of you who are incorporated. Again, you will know if you're incorporated if your name ends with INC, or if your FTB entity status number begins with an 8 or a 9. It is not incorporated. If it starts with a 0 through a 4, you are incorporated. So if you are incorporated, PTAs must file the SI 100 every other year. Incorporated units don't file this form. It's due 5 months before and through the ending of the month of the original registration. So I just look at the original registration and I try to file it like a month before or 2 months before, and I've been perfectly fine. If you have questions on that, please reach out. You can mail it in or you can file it online. I will tell you that First District PTA is incorporated. I file it online every year. There's a $20 filing fee plus a $5 fee if you want a certificate copy to say that you filed it. So this one does take 2 minutes or less. All you need is the names and the addresses of the president, secretary, and treasurer, and you can file it. So this one's a really easy one. And it really only applies to probably 20 to 30% of our units at this point. Okay, so you're done filing, but you're not done, because the most important thing to me and to Wendy as the incoming compliance officer is that all of your taxes are uploaded into myPTEZ. So in myPTEZ, every single unit has the document management component. It's free to every single unit. Your outgoing president can give your incoming president access, and your incoming president can give your entire board access. If you don't have access, please reach out to your counsel and they can help you with that as well. You're going to want to make sure all of those are uploaded so that we know that you filed. We do check on that every single year. We do want to make sure that everything has been filed so that you don't get a love letter from the IRS or the FTB or the Attorney General. One thing I haven't said enough, if you get a love letter from the IRS or the FTB or the Attorney General or the Secretary of State, do not call them yourself. Once again, do not call them yourself. Please reach out to your counsel, who will then refer you to Wendy, most likely, and she will help you work on that. We don't want units writing their own requests for abatement of penalties to get rid of the penalties. We as First District will write an abatement request on your behalf. And those are usually more positively received by the IRS. And we have been very successful in getting those fines and fees abated, because we say, listen, if they're all volunteers and they had the best intentions to file, if they do have to pay these fines and fees, it's taking it away from funds that should be spent on education for our public school kids. And they're usually sensitive to that. Let's see. If your council or your district requires you to forward a paper copy, please do that. Some do, some don't. In First District, we've gone all to myPTEZ to save a tree, which is great. So we don't have to have a ton of paper. Also know that tax filings are part of a PTA's permanent records. So this needs to be retained in your treasurer binder that goes into wherever you store all of your permanent files for your PTA. Okay. This is just a link to the Tax Filing Support Center on CAPTA. It is a wealth of information. Before you ask any questions, I would educate yourself here. Go check out the links and see if it answers your question. If it doesn't, always feel free to reach out to us, but you can learn so much through the tools that are on CAPTA's website. There also is a tax filing assistant. Her email is taxinfo@capta.org. She is available to help everybody. She can assist with requests for abatements, but usually we do that at First District. The one thing I would ask is if you do reach out to tax info, please CC Wendy. Please CC compliance@pta1.org so that she is aware of what's going on. Donna might be able to help you, but the responsibility always lands on First District PTA's shoulders. And so just keep Wendy in the loop. That's my only request. So yeah, that's about it. Let's see. There's the Lookup tools on their website. Okay. If you missed a deadline, file right away. Right away. The greatest thing to do is to catch it before the IRS or the FTB does. Because if you catch it before them, chances are they might not send you a fine or a fee, right? So if you missed a deadline, just get in there. To get back into compliance, Wendy will be doing compliance workshops or compliance training in the upcoming year for units that are not in compliance. The one thing that I cannot highlight more, don't ignore your delinquency or penalty notices. Those units that get them and send it to us right away, we can help them get out of hot water. Those units that have just ripped it up, got intimidated and put it in a file because they were embarrassed, the longer we wait, the less of a chance we have to get that fixed, right? So the second you get it, reach out to us. No big deal. We're all volunteers. We will help you to make it right. But definitely do not ignore those. We talked about a letter of determination. If you want a letter of determination is evidence of your PTA's tax exempt status, and you might need it to change signers on a bank account, although I've never heard of that. You almost always need it to procure donations. So if you're having a silent auction and you're asking for donations, I would with your donation request, send your letter of determination, right? For them to have to ask you, that's harder. If you just send it to them and it shows your tax ID and it says, okay, we are a nonprofit, so any donation that you give is tax deductible. A letter of determination can be requested at LOD@capta.org. LOD for letter of determination at capta.org. You have to be current with the Attorney General's Registry of Charitable Trusts to receive a letter of determination. That means you have to have all of your CTTR ones, or sorry, your RF ones filed and accepted. They are also linked to the FTB, so you will most likely need to have all of your 199s filed and accepted. Another reason to make sure that you are compliant is so that you can ask for donations and people are willing to donate to your PTA. The IRS doesn't issue an LOD, only CAPTA does, and she literally sends it to you within less than a day if you email her. A lot of you will get requests for a W-9 form. This is no big deal. Many businesses ask PTAs to complete this form to schedule some fundraisers. This is not the same as a letter of determination. They have two completely different purposes. With a W-9, you're confirming essentially that this really is your EIN number. An LOD confirms your tax exempt status, right? So two very different things. Here is a sample W-9 form. We just filled one out the other day. You'll see that you check other in the box here. And then you put your mailing address, you put your EIN, and you sign it. Just remember to check that other box. And that is it before taxes, before we turn over to audit. Do we have any more questions on taxes?
We do. So our first question is whether or not the copies of taxes in our filings should go to the secretary or if they should just stay with the treasurer's book.
That's a really good question. They should always be with the treasurer's book, because if the IRS ever did an audit or anything like that, they need to be with the treasurer's book. However, it doesn't hurt for the treasurer to keep a copy of the taxes attached to the minutes where they were reviewed by the executive board. So if you do both of those things, both of those are fantastic. The biggest priority is to make sure that they're with your treasurer's books.
Wonderful. Also, the next question is, how long is the letter of determination good for? Do we need to request it yearly?
That's a really good question. And I honestly don't know, but Donna always says, go ahead and request it yearly. Get a fresh one. Doesn't hurt to have a fresh date on it, and then that makes your donor more comfortable. Again, as long as you're current, you email LOD@capta.org and you say, here's my, my unit number or my unit name, and she will email it to you within a day.
Great. And the last one that we have right now is Should we continue handling processes according to the way it has been done by our board? Can we choose our own method, or should we discuss with all our board members? For example, the way the taxes are filed, paper versus electronic.
My guide, so unless you are sitting here on a training that has the most up-to-date information. And so my ask is that you take this back to your board and you ask them to operate in accordance with how we've trained you to operate today, right? So if I'm telling you that you need to file electronically, there's a reason for that, especially after the pandemic. There's a heightened reason for that. I can't tell you how many mail-in filings have been lost. And so if they're arguing versus mail-in or electronic, let them know that CAPTA, First District, and your council highly, highly, highly recommend electronic filing of your informational tax filings. Yeah.
I think maybe just to clarify that, like, whatever you decide to do, you do just want to make sure that your executive board is aware of what you're doing.
Agreed. You have the conversation, but take this back. So you're here, take this back to your executive board, have a conversation, help them understand why, right? Because part of us standing up here or sitting here training you is not just to tell you what to do, but to tell you why you need to do it. That's what I'm big on, so that you have an understanding, so that you can take that back to your executive board and have those critical conversations. Certainly as a PTA volunteer, you don't want to make any decisions single-handedly. That's not your role. We operate as a team, we operate as a board. But you now are educated because you've come to the training, and you can then go back and take that education to the rest of your board.
We do have one last question as to how do we request a W-9?
You don't request, W-9s are requested of you. So if somebody asks you to provide them a W-9, you just literally Google IRS W-9 and the form pops up.
All right, that's all I have for now.
Okay. Let's see. Let's switch on over to audits, which, wrong one. This is my sweet spot, people. Most of you don't love audits. This is what I love. Okay, how to complete a financial audit. Let's see. There's been some changes to this recently. The one thing I do want to talk about really quickly before we jump in is you will see the name audit throughout this presentation, and that will be changing over the next year. As a professional auditor coming into PTA, I knew very early on that what PTA does is not an audit, and it's not an audit in line with the California State Board of Accountancy. Because of this, PTA needs to change their verbiage. So you will expect to see a change. We do not do a full audit. That's why when we talked about on the RF1, when it asks if we did an audit in accordance with generally accepted accounting procedures, we do not. This is what I would call specified limited procedures. This is a very light review, right? So when we say audit, if any of you are professional auditors or have audit experience, know that we are not talking about a GAAP, generally accepted audit, accounting principle audit. We are specifically talking about the limited review procedures that CAPTA asks us to do. Okay, with that said, let's jump in. Why do we do an audit, right? So we're checking the accuracy of our financial records. We're looking for inconsistencies and errors. I've talked about this all day. It is to protect our officers and to protect the PTA assets. That's why we follow all these controls and procedures, is to protect us as volunteers. We want to verify that the funds are collected and spent as directed by the membership. We talked about a survey earlier. We want to make sure that our goals are in line with the goals of and the needs of the PTA membership and the administrators at the school. And then we also want to verify that no unauthorized transactions are made. Believe it or not, they are made. Sometimes that happens. And if that happens, please reach out to First District PTA. Okay, the audit timeline. I get a lot of questions on this. Does it matter when we do an audit? And the answer is yes. In your bylaws, in the toolkit, actually not in your bylaws anymore, they took it out. If you have bylaws before 2018, it's still in there. If it's after 2018, it's just in the toolkit. But audits are done semi-annually. They are done at the 6-month point and they are done at the annual point. And so if you are a June 30th year end, you have an audit of July 1 through December 31st. And then you have a second audit for January 1st through June 30th. Also, an audit is done when a bank account is closed or if a check signer resigns or is removed. That's very important. If your treasurer moves in May, you have to close your books and do an audit. So you're then going to do an audit from January 1st until May 15th when they moved, and then May 16th to June 30th, believe it or not. But you do have to do an audit as if a check signer resigns. Guys, an audit should not take more than 2 weeks. If an audit is taking a long time, you're spending too much time on it. We want to make sure that it's done quickly and we return those records back to the treasurer so they can continue on with their business. Okay. Who completes the audit? So this has been a big change in the last couple of years with our new relationship with AIM Insurance. It is an insurance industry guideline. So going forward, our audits must either be completed by a qualified auditor. What is a qualified auditor, right? A qualified auditor is someone who has been professionally trained or licensed to conduct audits such as a CPA or other qualified accountant. They don't have to be currently employed. I am not currently a CPA anymore. I was professionally trained and worked for years as a professional auditor. I am a qualified accountant. But they have most bookkeepers, office managers, bank employees have not been trained in professional auditing procedures and they do not fit the definition. They have to have been trained in audit, not accounting, audit, okay? If you don't have a qualified auditor, which 99 out of 100 of our PTAs do not have a qualified auditor, your auditor will do the audit, and then your president will appoint an audit review committee to review the audit, okay? This audit review committee can be one other person aside from the auditor as long as they are not a check signer. We get the question all the time, can check signers, can the president be part of the audit committee? Can the treasurer be part of the audit review committee? They can, believe it or not, as long as they don't represent a majority. So if you have the treasurer on it, then you have to have at least 2 other votes to counteract that one. If you have the treasurer and the president, you need to have at least 3. They cannot represent the majority, okay? If you don't have a qualified auditor or an audit review committee, you can go to the council or district auditor. I don't recommend this. Audits should be done at the unit level. They really should be. And now that we can do them with audit review committees, they should be able to be done at the unit level. You can also use a paid independent auditor. I also do not recommend this. Auditors are more expensive than tax preparers. So they will charge you a pretty penny to do your audit. So the best thing to do is to have an audit review committee from people on your board or members of your association. Okay, let's see. All accounts are audited separately. So I'm going to audit your checking account separately and your savings account separately, and they should have different audit reports. A lot of times I see auditors grouping them together. That's not how it should be done, okay? So we're going to review all financial transactions. When I was first started, I asked that question because GAAP audits, you only do a small percentage, right? Because you can't walk into a company and audit every transaction. In PTA, we audit every single transaction, okay? We're looking for proper accounting for income and expenditures, and that the income and expenditures have been authorized. Remember, we talked so much in Treasurer 1 and 2 about that approval process, your auditor is going to make sure that that approval process was filed. Make sure that the auditor is never a check signer, nor are they related to one. So the audit checklist, and these are in, I believe I put them in the documents. This is the very top of the audit checklist. This shows everything that a treasurer needs to give to the auditor. So every little one of these, you're going to go through and just check off and make sure that you've given them everything. Okay. Anything not given to the auditor is going to note in their recommendations. So now let's jump into how to do an audit. Now that the auditor has the books and is ready to go, right? You're going to go through an audit checklist, and I'm going to show you, it's in the next couple slides. And you're going to check yes or no for each item. Any item where no is checked, it's a recommendation. Guys, recommendations are no big deal. Anytime I've been a treasurer, I get recommendations on my audit. Anytime I've been an auditor, I give recommendations. We are not perfect. Please don't expect to have a perfect audit. And it's just really not that big of a deal. I know some people get really worked up over it, but expect to have recommendations. Look for recommendations on how we can do things better, right? This is really important. Any corrections that you find, they have to be made by the treasurer or the financial secretary. The auditor cannot make changes, okay? Okay. So the beginning balance, we're going to look at that treasurer's report. I always start with the treasurer's report because remember on the treasurer's report for the entire audit period, it's going to have that beginning balance. It's going to have all of the income. It's going to have all of the expenditures, and it's going to have an ending balance. I'm going to take that beginning balance and I'm going to make sure that beginning balance agrees to the last audit. If it doesn't agree to the last audit, we need to figure out why, right? So make sure that those two numbers agree. That's your very first step. Then we're going to jump into audit procedures. We talked about bank reconciliation. So you're going to look at every single monthly bank reconciliation. Now remember, if you were doing the 5-minute audit and you were reviewing the bank reconciliations, you've already done this step, right? You can just mark, yep, all the bank statements were open, reviewed, and signed by a non-check signer. That was either the auditor or somebody else that had access. They were all reconciled and signed by the treasurer and reviewed by the auditor already. Done. Mark yes. The ending balances agree with the last bank statement. You're going to make sure that you agree the reconciliation to the bank statement. You're going to look through the deposits and the checks written. The one right here that's the big thing is this is signed by 2 authorized check signers. Remember, we said that we need to make sure that the auditor can see either through your bank statement or through your online banking that there were 2 check signers because they need to be able to say yes or no to this, right? Electronic payments and deposits were recorded in the checkbook register. I can't tell you how many times people have come to me and they're like, I can't get my audit to balance. Well, it's because they didn't include the interest income. They didn't include the $3 bank fees, right? So make sure that those are recorded as well. And bank charges and interest. So we're going to go through the bank reconciliation. We've talked about that a lot today. Membership income. So there's 2 different memberships incomes. So we're going to want to verify that memberships have been recorded and deposited and that it equals total number of memberships. You're going to want the membership list from the secretary. You're going to agree that membership list to the accounting, right? So if you have 100 members and it was $4.25 that you guys kept for your members, you should have $425 in membership income, right? And remember that you guys are, the auditor is going to check. We talked a lot about this today about segregating between the money that stays at the unit and the money that's remitted through channels. You're going to make sure that that has been properly done and that all money that was supposed to be remitted up through channels has been remitted through channels. Okay. Totem's a little bit different because we don't have to check because it's automatically deposited, right? Because documentation is still needed. If they don't have documentation, remember what I said in the treasurer's training, which is all they need to do is go onto Totem and go into the reports and into the payout report. The payout report will give you the detail of everything that went into your bank account. They need to print that off for backup for the auditor for support for that income line item. Okay. You're going to make sure that the number of memberships on total is reported and accurate, and that equals to the money that you received. This is a tricky one. For some reason, the last bullet point there, for some reason, CAPTA decided that for May 31st year ends, like Burbank, it's great, right? But for those of us who are June 30th year ends, CAPTA decided that all memberships that were received in Totem for the month of June count for the next year. Let me say that again. All memberships that are purchased in Totem or received in Totem for the month of June are memberships for the next fiscal year. So you're going to want to make sure there's going to be that those amounts are not recorded in this current year. They need to be applied to revenue for the next year. Okay. And again, if you're one of those units where this impacts, it was only about 15 units in all of First District last year. Please reach out to us and we'll help you understand how to handle that. Minutes and committees. Every single treasurer's book should include all of the executive board meeting minutes, the general association meeting minutes, and committee reports. I rarely see committee reports at the unit level, and that's okay. You can just write not applicable. But you're going to want to make sure, because for all of your expenditures, you're going to make sure that their funds are released by the association. These are new this year. The original budget is approved by the association and recorded in the minutes. Funds are released by the association and recorded in the minutes. All expenditures, remember, we talked about all expenditures. You're going to go through every single expenditure and make sure it's in the minutes as approved by the executive board and ratified by the association. The ones that are not, we're going to list in our recommendation that these still need to be approved by the association and the executive board. Okay. Audit procedures. This is where you're going to focus your time. This is going to take the bulk of your time in an audit. So authorizations for payment, those are your expenditures. Every check, every EFT online payment should have an authorization page, and you're going to make sure you go through that. You're going to add up all the receipts. You're going to make sure that it totals and that equals the same amount on the check, right? You're going to make sure that it has the president's signature and that it has the secretary's signature. So it's for approved amounts that are written in the budget. It has the receipt attached and it authorizes or it matches the checks written. And you're going to go for every single one of those. If there's one that doesn't, you're going to write a recommendation, and the recommendation is simply going to say check 101029 was not signed by the president. That's all. That's what the recommendation says. And then you usually say all authorizations must be signed by the secretary and president so that they know what the requirement is. For income, you're going to make sure every time anything was deposited, it has proper support. What is that proper support? That is the cash verification form that we talked about, using 2 people counting and signing for the money, right? You're going to make sure that the income that we received in the bank account matches the cash verification form, matches the deposit slip, and matches what's in the bank statement. This last one is designated income is spent as specified. This is really focused on if you get a donation where a parent says this needs to be spent on science for 3rd grade, they can do that. My recommendation is don't accept it. As much as we want to accept all donations, donations that come with restrictions are very hard to track. So I would recommend that you do not accept restricted donations. You just accept general donations, or you make it a policy that all donations are general, right? Otherwise, you need to make sure that that the unit tracked that designated income and spent it appropriately. Most of the time, you're not going to see this. Okay, before we move on, are there any questions on audit procedures? Because the rest of it is really just how to fill out the audit report.
We do have one question. In doing your audit, what if you find out that your treasurer is not really doing their job? Should there a request go into the board to change and replace with a new treasurer, as we rely heavily on what the treasurer does?
That's a really good question, and I can't tell you, we've had issues with that, right? The problem is we usually need to understand the reasons behind it, because sometimes it very well may be that they just weren't trained appropriately, and we need to give them more training. Sometimes it might be that they have a health or an illness in the family, and we need to give them a little bit more support. So before we jump to removing them or recommending, I wouldn't ever have an auditor ask to remove them. There are signs before that the executive board should have noticed. Are we getting treasurer's reports? Are we getting timely information? The board would have noticed that before, so that is not on the auditor to decide. Now, if there's tons and tons and tons and tons of recommendations, work with your counsel to make sure that you're handling this appropriately, because we're all volunteers. We never want to talk down to a volunteer or make a volunteer feel bad. Sometimes it really is just a lack of training.
All right. We also have a question as to, for those units who have their memberships in June and they don't count until the next fiscal year, how do you account for that money once you receive the cash for those memberships?
Because that's literally only about 20 of you, and it might not actually apply to the person who's asking, I would ask you, if that occurs, can you please just email me at treasurer@pta1.org, and I will specifically walk you through how to handle that.
Great. And then let's see.
Judy Wu has her hand up.
Yes, I saw that. Judy, why don't you go ahead and unmute yourself and let us know what your question is.
Oh, thank you, Andy. I wonder that for since as a auditor we provide and then give the independent opinion, based really kind of heavily rely on the treasurer's work. So like if we couldn't be able to timely get our report or audit done, so if we entered it to be like when you mentioned the treasurer has to be provide sufficient training, how the treasurer is going to have a separate training or prior to be elected to the board? Because the reason I raised the question is that I kind of already noticed and then have a sense probably will be, most likely will happen, we will say. So prior to the school start, so should I raise the question to the board or how? Because I cannot review, like let's say the auditor cannot review their own work, right? If I or someone else as an auditor, so they provide, we pretty much kind of reconcile and make sure every procedure is going to apply. And then I like when you said it that, oh, you know, it's a limited, we really have a limited sources. So I just want to make sure that if we can, because since this is the first year of myself, I sort of, is there any way, I don't mind to do treasurer's work, but what if like this become an issue? Do I email you or, you know, discuss with our board first, or how are we going to be resolved? Am I getting too complicated question? Sorry. Is that
No,
easy
no,
to
no,
understand?
can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, it's not a complicated question, but that's when I would work with your president, because your president needs to then go to the council. If you truly have a concern about their ability and they need training, council can step in and train. We can make sure that the council treasurer is really close to that person so that they can give them guidance. It's great to identify it early, right? But it's not just the auditor's responsibility, it's the responsibility of the entire board to because that treasurer should be providing information constantly, multiple times a month. And if that's not happening, then please work really closely with your council. If you're out of council, work really closely with First District, because we can step in and help make sure that everybody's trained and that everything is happening appropriately. Okay?
Thank you so much.
You got it. Okay, let's move on. So we've already talked about required filings. The auditor is just going to make sure that they paid their insurance, that they did their tax filings, and that they, if they had a workers' comp report, that they filed it, or if they didn't have any workers' comp, that they filed the report with none. They're going to look through every single one of their treasurer's reports, financial secretary's reports, if they have them, and the annual financial report. So they're really going to do a deep dive on everything and make sure everything flows throughout the year. And then when they're done, they're going to fill out the audit report. So this is an updated audit report, which is great. So we'll go the top of the form, you're going to fill out with the date, the name, the council, the bank name. They changed this. This used to have the account number, and they changed it to the account name because they wanted to make sure that our bank account numbers were more secure. This is a little bit new. So memberships is included now. They want to know how much is your membership per your bylaws, which is why your auditor needs to make sure they have access to your bylaws, right? And then they're going to write how many members came in year to date. And of those members that came in year to date, how many were e-members? Those e-members are your totem members. Okay, so that's pretty easy to fill out. This is your audit roll forward. So this is going to take you, you're essentially going to take your, the date covered by the audit. So this one is July 1st, 2020 through 12/31/2020, the check numbers that are covered in the audit. And then you're going to say, okay, the last audit was done the day before this, right? So June 30th, 2020. And this was the balance then. For the 6 months, here's our receipts. And you can add up, you can either have them run a report, a treasurer's report for the 6 months, or you'll add up each treasurer's report for every single month. You add in all the disbursements. There's my mouse. You add in all the disbursements, and then you'll have your balance on hand. Now, this is your book balance on hand, right? This isn't always the same as your bank balance because you had to do a bank reconciliation. This right here is your bank reconciliation. So you're going to take, this actually has a wrong date here, which is funny. You're going to take your bank statement as of December 31st, 2020. You're going to put that in there. You're going to add any deposits in transit. So if you got money that you haven't had a chance to take to the bank, we never do that, right? That was all, everything gets deposited right away. That will show up there. And then if you've written any checks, you have any outstanding checks, you're going to include those there. And we're essentially reconciling our book balance to our bank balance. Okay. And then finally, there's 2 different steps. This is how you fill out your report if you're a qualified auditor. If you had a qualified auditor, you're going to Sunshine Elementary PTA, and you have 5 options. The first one is correct with no recommendations. The second one is correct with the attached recommendations. I may or may not have had something to do with adding that on CAPTA's form. I believe that numbers can be correct even if all of the procedures weren't followed. And so I think it's critical to have this. So this would be if your numbers are correct, but they didn't have every single check wasn't approved by the president, or the bank statements might not have been opened by a non-check signer, right? Substantially correct with the attached recommendations, partially correct. These are all judgment calls but you need to have a conversation on this with your treasurer and your president to make sure that they agree, okay? And then incorrect is if really the numbers are wrong, everything's wrong, they didn't follow any procedures. So you're gonna put the date that the audit was completed. You will not have an audit review committee. That's gonna say NA. You're gonna have the date that the executive board adopted it, because remember, we are gonna report this to the executive board. And when you report to the executive board, you include all the recommendations. You walk through all of the recommendations. When you put it in front of the association, you do not walk through all the recommendations. The association does not need to know all that. If they ask what the recommendations are, you can simply say, the recommendations have been presented to the executive board and are being addressed, okay? Then you're gonna have the auditor's signature, and you're gonna check, is this a qualified accountant? Yes, if not, no. And then your review committee signature, we'll go to this next one. This is for a review committee, so you check no, and your review committee will sign. Common mistakes on an audit. Using the bank statement balance instead of the checkbook balance. We've talked a lot about that. You want to make sure that you're using your book balance and you're reconciling to your bank statement. Forgetting to deduct outstanding checks. Forgetting to account for prior outstanding checks that have since been cleared or voided. That's a big one. If you can't reconcile that page, always look to see if somebody may have voided a check in this current year that was written in a previous audit period, right? That's a big one. And then check dates on deposit and check requests. Okay. An audit recommendation letter. The completed audit consists of the audit report, the audit checklist, remember that yes or no, and any separate list of recommendations. And you're going to give a complete copy of the audit to all the appropriate officers, including the secretary, to include it in her minutes. It does say an audit may be signed by electronic signatures, but I want to talk about it needs to be one of those true digital signatures again, right? Not just something that you can put in Adobe, the free version. It needs to be a true digital signature, not just a typed name or a cursive name from Adobe. Let's see. We talked about a 5-minute audit, but the auditor can really help their job if they look at it every single month. If they're looking at the treasurer's books every single month, then when they go to do it at the end of the 6-month period, it takes a lot less time. When you do a 5-minute audit, it's not a requirement, but you can look at the checks listed, make sure there's 2 checks. Make sure the dates, the amounts, and the payees match the treasurer's report, right? Then when you do the audit, you've already done that. And then you're going to look at the deposits to make sure that the dates match the financial secretary and treasurer's reports, that the deposits were made in a timely manner, that no unauthorized online banking has occurred, and there's no ATM withdrawals. So back to the question before, if this 5-minute audit is being done on a monthly basis, then you won't have had 6 months of a treasurer who didn't know what they were doing, because we're catching it much earlier, right? Some red flags, big time issues if they have a lack of receipts, if they're not doing financial reports, if your officer misses meetings or isn't returning phone calls or emails, if there's no money to pay bills, but you know the PTA should have money, right? If there's any cash withdrawals or use of an ATM card. If this happens, do not handle it on your own. Please contact your council and your district president and treasurers. We will come in and do an audit for mismanagement. Financial situations to avoid, and this is the last slide. We should not have school staff members as a treasurer president. In fact, many school districts have rules against this. Make sure you understand your specific school district's rules. Stay really close to a principal who wants projects funded without going through the approval process. Most of our principals are amazing, but we do need to make sure that they understand that we have an approval process and we're not just an open bank account, right? This is a big one, encumbering future boards by paying salaries for ongoing staff positions. If you hire somebody like an aide, you want to make sure that you have funds to pay them for quite a few years. Otherwise, you're employing somebody for a year and not, or you are encumbering a future board. So anytime you're thinking about staffing positions, talk with your council or your district leaders and they can give you some good advice on that. Obviously, we don't sign blank checks, and we want to make sure that our minutes are very clear and complete, especially when they're talking about the funds. Every treasurer and auditor should review the minutes when they come out to make sure that what was done in the treasurer's report is detailed correctly in the minutes. Okay, I know I went kind of through that as we were trying to fit 2 presentations into an hour and a half, but Wendy, how are we doing on questions?
Okay, so we have a question about when you're doing the audit, when there are multiple stale dated checks over $1,000, do we list each stale dated check on the attached recommendations page or the audit report itself? If the payees are non-responsive, the checks were never deposited, if we're doing stop payments, if doing stop payments are too many, multiple checks and costly, can money be entered back into the ledger without a stop payment? What do you think the best practice is?
Great questions. Lots of questions in there. Okay. So as an auditor, I assess risk, right? So if I have $1,000 check that's been out there for 2 years, first of all, it never should have gotten to you. It should have been voided a long time ago, right? Secondly, I need to understand who the check was to. Is there truly any risk of that being deposited? If there is a check that has been outstanding and there is risk of it being deposited, then yes, we do want to go through the process of putting a stop payment on the bank. If it's somebody that's in your PTA that lost it, what happens if, like, hey, it was in my pocket and I put them in the washer and the check's gone, right? Then you don't necessarily need to put a stop payment on that because that costs money and you know there's no risk of it being deposited. I document that as an auditor. I document that as a treasurer, my risk assessment of those outstanding checks. That's very important. I made the decision not to do a stop payment because, and I want to make sure that the executive board is okay with that as well. If it's been outstanding for a long time, void the check, right? If it's been outstanding past 6 months, definitely void the check. So, and that was, we discussed that in kind of our cleanup and our treasurers training. They should be looking at outstanding checks and voiding them before it even gets to the audit, right? But if they're not, then absolutely they need to be included in those outstanding checks because they're still hanging out there, and absolutely detail them in your audit recommendations. I think I hit every question in there, right?
I think so. Okay, so one of our fabulous attendees has asked if there is a list of the definitions for the audit recommendations. You know, is there a like, how do you know when to say correct with the following recommendations, substantially correct? Is there anywhere to look for definitions?
There is not. It's a great question. It's a question I've been asking for a long time. It's part of the reason why I asked for that 5th option on there. It is all judgment, which is why if you have a question, call your council auditor and talk through it with them. Talk through it with the president and the treasurer to make sure you're all on the same page. Remember, a PTA audit is not designed to be punitive. We do not want to be punitive to our treasurer who is a volunteer. We want to acknowledge if there's issues and things that we need to fix going forward, but we don't want to be punitive. And so we need to consider that as we look for our audit opinion. And if you have any questions, call your council auditor and talk with them about it, and they can give you good guidance. Great question though.
All right. And then we had a very interesting question that I think you will like is one of our panel participants was recommended that the school staff member should be the treasurer to ensure that the funds are at the school before they go and get deposited into the bank.
That goes back to, so I say absolutely not. That is a lot of responsibility to put on an employee of the school district. And I would get approval from the school district before I personally would ask any teacher or staff member to be the treasurer. Now, if that person is also a parent at the school and they're the school secretary, that's a little bit different, right? But if they're just solely an employee of the school district, you're going to want to clear that with the principal. You're going to want to clear that with HR at the school district. I think that puts both the too much pressure, financial pressure on the teacher and on the PTA executive board. Really awkward positions could come out of that, right?
All right. We had Kim, one of our participants, said that from her experience, some banks will waive a stop payment fee if you ask them to and explain that you are a nonprofit. So
yes, Kim, thank you. That's amazing. They will waive your fees. They will waive your monthly bank charges. They will waive anything. Some of them will. Some of them will not. The big banks, they're not going to do that, right? It never hurts to ask the question. Hey, same thing that we do with the IRS. All this money should be going to our public school, to the public education for our students. Is there any way that you can waive this? We're a 501c3, tax exempt. And a lot of times, especially credit unions, local ones, they'll waive those fees. So that's a great comment. Thank you.
All right. We do have one question. So we have Esmeralda, we definitely got your question, but because it's more treasurer process based, I thought maybe if you could wait afterwards and we could answer that there. And then auditor wise, we do have somebody who said that they were asked to be the auditor and they are not a CPA. So they just want to confirm that they will need to have an audit review committee.
Unless you have been trained in doing audits, you will need to have an audit review committee. All that audit review committee needs to do is to go through what you did and make sure it fell in, but you did all the steps on the audit checklist. They're not doing the audit. They're just reviewing what you've done. But yes, unless you are a trained auditor, you need to have an audit review committee. Great question.
All right. And then we did have a question, apparently that was asked at the end of the Treasurer 2 session about giving the checkbook to the auditor with the records so that nothing is accidentally paid while the books are closed.
So, great question. I personally do not believe that, so there's not a business in the world that stops for their audit. Doesn't happen. And I know this because I was a professional auditor, right? You can't stop PayPal from running their business because they're in the middle of the audit. The only time when I think it's necessary to take the checkbook to stop the business of the association is if there is a concern for mismanagement. Aside from that, I believe that the treasurer should give them the historical checks, but I personally believe they can continue with their operations while the audit is being done. If there are heads being blown out there, I apologize, but I do stand by this comment. I really only believe that you need to stop operations, 2 times. If there has been a change in officer, check signing officer, or if there is a concern for mismanagement. And Wendy, how many more? I know I'm focused on time. What we can also do is we will print off the chat and we will send an FAQ to all of our attendees within the next couple of weeks to make sure that everybody has a documented answer to all of our questions. But I know it's been a long day and I want to make sure that we are respectful of people's time today.
We're actually at the end. We just had, as I said, we had one participant has a more treasurer process based. So I thought maybe we could just make sure everybody is good, or we could maybe open it up for any questions if they need it, I mean, I don't see anything else in the chat.
Okay, well, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna end this. I'm gonna stop recording. I'm gonna say thank you to all of you for coming, for your time, for being willing to be trained, for your volunteerism, for the students at your school and your community. Thank you so much. I am willing to stay on for the next 20 minutes or so and answer questions. If you want to stay on and ask any questions, but I'm going to go ahead and end the recording now and just say thank you so much for coming.